I was 7 when I lost my sight in the car accident that killed my father. Naturally, after treating the other injuries I suffered, major and minor, the loss of vision was investigated. The various specialists who saw me could find no physical cause for my condition, so they suspected neurological blindness. MRI scans showed no damage to the optical nerve or occipital lobe, so, while not completely discounted, they looked in other areas. In the end, the most likely cause, by which I mean the one most of the various doctors my mother took me to agreed upon, was psychological or hysterical blindness. It made sense. I had suffered a massive psychological trauma. The therapist I ended up seeing to try to alleviate my condition was, and still is, a lovely lady. She quickly helped me see that I blamed myself for the accident, and if I could learn to forgive myself, I may begin to see an improvement in my vision. She was right, of course, about blaming myself, that is. It was my fault. I had, for the first time in my life, saved up to buy my own toy. I had seen the advertisements for the Laser Blaster set, a home version of laser tag on TV, and begged my parents to buy it for me. It was a bit more expensive than the gifts they bought for me when I'd earned a reward, so they saw it as an opportunity to teach me a life lesson. They agreed that they would start paying me for chores I did around the house, and once I'd saved up enough, they'd take me to buy the set. Of course, at first I was unhappy with the situation. I'd wanted it there and then, but I loved and trusted them, so I agreed. I threw myself into my chores with gusto and took on extra ones whenever I could to get that little bit closer to my prize. It felt like it took an eternity, but it was probably only about 2 or 3 weeks later that I'd saved up enough. I was so excited that I counted the money up one more time to make sure it really was enough, and then I took it to my father, grinning almost from ear to ear. The journey to the toy shop was longer than it had ever been in the past. Now I knew exactly what I was going there for and how much I wanted it. When we finally arrived, I was bouncing around in my seat like I was about to burst with excitement. Dad came around to open the door, and having already undone my seatbelt while parking, I all but fell out of the car and ran to the doors of the store, stopping only to turn around and wait for him. He was grinning at his offspring, bouncing around like a puppy as he shut the door and came over. We went inside, and I started running up and down the aisle, searching for the treasure I'd been questing for all that time, leaving him to follow slowly with the knowing sigh that only a parent can manage. I spotted it on a shelf just out of my reach, and I started jumping to get it. I whimpered a little when it remained out of my grasp, and I did something every child is told not to at some point. I placed a foot on the bottom shelf, held an up one, and started climbing. I'd reached the second foothold when the shelving unit began to tilt backwards. I had started to panic when an arm wrapped around me, and the shelf stopped dead before tilting slowly back into place with boxes wobbling and one even falling over. Luckily nothing hit the floor, and Dad stood over me with a stern look as he lowered me down. I looked back at him with my best lesson-learned face, and as nothing had been damaged, he seemed to accept it. He lifted one of the boxes down and handed it to me. I wrapped my arms around it and clutched it tight. Finally, it was mine. We went up to the counter, and I placed the toy eagerly in front of the girl at the till. She wore the look of someone whose job it was to smile a lot, a happy face, yet hollow and meaningless. As she ran the scanner over the barcode and told me the price, I reached into my pockets and placed a handful of notes and coins before her with a feeling of pride welling inside me that I had earned this. It was all mine. "Will you be needing batteries with that?" she said, looking to and fro between Dad and me. Of course, I'd only thought about having the toy and the games I could play with it when friends came over. It hadn't occurred to me that batteries would be needed for that to happen. My smile dropped. I couldn't come this close and have my prize snatched away from me. "I think I can get this one. You've earned it," I heard Dad say, and I grinned widely back up at him again, throwing my arms around his waist. He paid the extra, and the girl placed a large pack of AA batteries in the box into a large bag that she then handed to me. I grasped it and thanked her politely before running back out of the store and waiting by the car. I couldn't wait to get home and try out my new toy, that new prized possession that I had grafted and saved for. When I say I couldn't wait, I mean it literally. If I'd been able to be a little more patient, or maybe even a little less, things might have gone very differently. About halfway home, though, on a busy stretch of road, I lost the fight and I had to play with my new toy. I pulled the box out of the bag and ripped the sealing tape from the opening. "You should really wait until we get home," Dad said from the front seat, but I was too excited. I'd waited forever for this, and I couldn't last another 20 minutes until the safety of my bedroom. Opening it was a glorious moment. Never before had something so simple as feeling cardboard flaps rubbing against each other felt so important. I gazed down in awe at the two guns, which looked like something out of a cheesy space movie from the 70s, even down to the yellow plastic rings around the barrels and the small plastic vests with the target printed on the chest. I pulled one of the guns out and just turned it over in my hands. I can still remember the cool feel of the blue plastic of the handle in my clammy little mitts. It was no good. I had to hear the sounds they'd played so loudly in the ad that had hooked me. I reached back into the bag and pulled out the batteries, ripping the cardboard back off the pack. I fumbled 2 of them into the compartment in the handle of the gun before turning my attention to the vest. I pulled the corresponding one out and shoved another 4 into the compartment for that. It wasn't easy with the car moving about, but I smiled wide as I managed it and clipped the cover into place. I flicked the switches on both of them and a shiver ran down my spine as a long, loud, obnoxious beep emitted from both pieces and LEDs began flashing away at various places on them. I pointed the gun at the vest and pulled the trigger. Tinny sounds akin to those in the same movies that had inspired the appearance of the toy filled the car. Beeps, zaps, buzzing and more filled the air around us. The sort of sounds only a child can love, while every adult around wonders how such a thing can be allowed to exist. "Really, buddy, I think that's enough," Dad said, clearly irritated already but trying to keep a calm exterior. "Play with it at home, yeah?" I barely heard him as I was in my own world of bliss, though, and I kept pulling the trigger. "Seriously, that's enough," he said through gritted teeth. Zap, buzz, buzz. I said, "That's enough! Stop it!" he yelled, finally at breaking point, and gave me a stern look that said he wasn't playing. I'd hardly heard him raise his voice in the past, so I looked at him shocked and stopped playing. Fate has a nasty habit of picking the wrong time for everything, and for some reason the car in front of us had, for whatever reason, chosen the exact moment he'd looked away for an instant to slam on their brakes. He looked back just in time to hit his own brakes too late, and we ploughed into the back of them. Had I been patient and waited until we got home, there would have been no accident. New sounds flowed around us, metal bending and tearing, glass shattering, and a terrible ringing that seemed to fill my head. Had I played with it 10 seconds earlier, he would have looked back in time and he'd still be alive. I felt myself thrown forwards, the seatbelt around me digging deep into my young chubby flesh and forcing all the air out of my lungs. Had I played with it a few seconds later, he would have been looking at the car in front where they braked and would have stopped in time. When the shock of the impact died down a little, I looked around with my face now as white as a sheet. I saw Dad over in the driver's seat. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. Had I given up on earning that damn toy or not wanted it in the first place, we wouldn't even have been there for the accident to happen. It was all my fault. There is a reason I can never forgive myself. A constant reminder of what I did. You see, while it is true that blindness is a total inability to perceive any visual stimuli, an image of sufficient psychological trauma can be imprinted into the mind so vividly that it can be seen as if it's right in front of you. If you've ever thought, "I can still see such and such whenever I close my eyes," it's kind of like that if your eyes are always closed. If you ask someone who lost their sight later in life what the last thing they remember seeing is, they'll respond with something like a vivid blue sky, a rainbow after a storm, the face of a loved one, or even something as seemingly as banal as the gravel of a newly paved road, all of which can be as vivid and beautiful to them as anything you could see now. My answer to the same question is my dad's dull, dead eyes staring back into mine from the front seat of the car, his neck twisted at the impossible angle needed to achieve such a thing. Not only is this the last thing I remember seeing, but for 2 decades now, I haven't been able to stop seeing it every second that I'm awake. And that was Blind. It's a simple title for a simple concept and essentially a simple story, but I think sometimes the short things are the sweetest. I'm going to be honest, I can't find a huge amount of faults with this one, but again, I'm biased as it's one of my own stories again, and it is one I'm very proud of. That said, though, there are a few things that I wasn't perfectly happy with. I rewrote the section about the guns looking like cheesy 70s movie props in order to aid the flow because it didn't quite work the way I had it before, but the way I've got it now, it does end up implying that the vests with the target on them look like they're also out of the same movies, and that wasn't intentional. I'd like to think it doesn't detract too much, though. The actual condition that the protagonist got, I referred to it as hysterical blindness first. It's actually not been called that for a long time. It's actually now referred to as a type of conversion disorder, and not psychological blindness, another term that's not really used anymore. This is something I did find out after using those terms, though. As they're not really ridiculous sounding terms, though, I don't feel they're too bad for the story. The bit about seeing the traumatic image essentially forever. That's not something I was able to find evidence of. That's not to say it doesn't happen, it might well. I'm just saying that in my admittedly limited Googling, I couldn't find a huge amount of evidence for it. I still think it's a believable condition, though, even if it's not a real one, so I'd like to think it still keeps within the bounds of suspension of disbelief. The noises that I used in it, the buzzing, zapping, beeping noises, admittedly they are irritating, but they are supposed to be. It tries to give an air of annoyance. I tried to find a balance between that and the vocals, though, so it did give that air of annoyance without distracting too much from the story. Like I say, I am very proud of this one. The story itself, it sounds plausible, and it's horrific to think of a child not only losing a parent at that age, and so horribly, but to blame himself for the rest of his life due to that constant, terrible reminder, seeing that death for every second for the rest of his life. I'd like to think that most people can sympathise with the protagonist of the story, because being that annoying little kid is something that pretty much all of us have done at some point or another. As for the video itself, I like to think that I actually successfully put a bit more emotion into this one to aid with the immersion. Admittedly, some of that was actually because I hadn't got my breathing right and I was running out of breath, but like I said, I like to think that for the most part, I'm getting better at actually projecting myself into the story, the emotion, getting out what it would actually feel like to help with the immersion into the story for the listener. Tell me if I'm right, tell me if I'm wrong, give me your opinions, give me your advice in the comments. If you liked the video, stick a like in the like bar. If you didn't, then, don't, because I can't force you to do anything. I'm not your mum. Subscribe for more. I'm doing these stories every week, and it seems to be going okay so far, even if it is leaving me a little bit rushed and not a lot of time to do everything else. And until next time, everybody keep being beautiful to each other. Bye bye.